Do you remember this?
I have a bit of a cliffhanger for you, because I have now thought of a premise for the story. The faster you go, the more dialogue options you'll unlock with people. And stuff.
Do you remember this? You remember when I spent ages talking about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I make some of the story next month? Yeah, that could be quite fun. You remember that? You know, that seemed like quite a good idea, and it would have gone fine if I hadn't just discovered the text boxes take approximately 1 month total to create. About 1 month, yeah. And I'd already started making them before this month. I guess I shouldn't try and get these devlogs done in a month anymore, because honestly, that just doesn't work. I suppose the lesson is, sometimes you just have to find out something is 5 times as much work as you thought, and you can't bypass the problem in any way. Okay, so strap in. Here's the problem. Everything has to pause, and then a text box has to open that you can flick through, and then everything should unpause. Easy peasy, right? Yeah. Problem. How do I pause everything? Let's look it up. Maybe Sean Spaulding can come to my rescue once again. Oh yeah, thank you.
Pausing your game can be hard work.
See, this guy seems to know what he's... What? What? That's pausing? There's so much. What does that all mean? Okay, right. It's based on this command. Instance deactivate all. Okay, so hang on. Why not just run that command? So whenever I press pause, everything will deactivate. Oh. Okay, so what's going on here is that on every frame, every object does all these steps in this order, and one of the steps is draw, which, you know, draws the object. So if you deactivate all the steps, then you deactivate all of the steps. Okay, so all of this, what, is this supposed to fix that then? Fine, I guess. Let's just hear the explanation of it.
We just need to make one object, call it opause or similar, and mark it as persistent. Next, in the create event, we want the variables pause, pause surf, and pause surf buffer. Then we'll add the post draw event. The idea is we'll capture an image of our game screen to a surface and then disable all of our game objects. We can then draw this frozen image to the screen. If we are pausing, then we deactivate all other instances. Then we capture this particular game moment. Even though our game instances don't exist anymore, they've already been drawn to the application surface as we are in the post draw event. So all we need to do is copy what's currently on the application surface. We make a new surface that is the width and height of our application surface. We draw the application surface to that surface, and we're done.
Wait, what? Hang on. Can I hear that again?
We make a new surface that is the width and height of our application surface. We draw the application surface to that surface, and we're done.
Okay.
Importantly though, surface data can be very volatile, so to keep the surface safe, we need to back it up to a buffer. We create a buffer that is the size of the surface in pixels multiplied by 4. We then use buffer get surface to copy the surface data into the buffer. If we are unpausing, things are much simpler. We just reactivate our instances and free the surface and buffer from memory.
Right, so if I get the gist, when you pause, it does this, which surface set targets your surface to application surface buffer, and the buffer of the buffer surface buffers your surface to the application. And then you can keep running that on... Oh cool, I understand that code perfectly. Okay, so that's the first bit done. Now I just have to draw the text boxes. Wow, I'm basically halfway done. So, since all of this code can't be in the camera, because otherwise the camera would be active and it might move while the frozen image is on screen, all the text boxes will have to be handled inside the object that's handling pausing, since everything will be deactivated, so it'll be the only thing that's actually running. So essentially the pause controller would work like whenever it exists in a room, everything else is deactivated, and then when it deletes itself, everything gets reactivated, like nothing ever happened. So now let's make some text box opening animations. So Whenever the pause object exists in a room, it can draw these text boxes over the frozen image. So in addition to pausing, this object will now need to hold all of the text box code as well. Just to clarify, everything that moves around in GameMaker is called an object. That includes the player, the camera, whose sprite looks like this, enemies, and item pickups, and they all have different code for their behavior. The pause controller object I've been talking about is the same thing, but invisible, and its only job is to control rendering. So next, rendering the text. There's this draw text command that I can use to do this quite simply, but there's some other stuff I have to do before drawing everything. For example, I want to code a system that adds line breaks to text automatically, since, all the characters have different widths, so if I wanted to do it manually, I couldn't just count how many fit in one line and then put line breaks every that many characters. I just have to guess and then keep loading up the text in-game over and over to check if all the line breaks are in the right place. So, let's make some code to add line breaks, or remodulate it? That's funny. I forgot I put that there. Essentially, the simplest way I can think of to do this would be to count through every character in a message, and then keep track of the line's width so far, as well as any spaces we come across. Then, if the line's width ever becomes longer than the width of the text box, which is 161 pixels, we can store the location of the last spacebar we found, and then afterwards split the whole line into an array, with each new element in the array representing a new line. Cool, I've made that. Now let's see if it didn't work. It just didn't work. Now here's the first genuine issue, because when I look at this, I have no clue where to begin. Like, what do you even debug here? It's clearly just inserting a new line wherever it thinks you need one, and the fact that it doesn't think you need one in the right place, it's not a very easy thing to ask why it thinks you need line breaks there. And anyway, it's a computer. Its job is counting. That's what it's for.
Well, Seymour, I made it, despite your directions.
Ah, Superintendent Chalmers, welcome. I hope you're prepared for an unforgettable luncheon.
Ah.
Oh, ye gods! My roast is fast food and disguise it as my own devilish. It was just on the windowsill. Care to join me?
Why?
Ruined! But what if I were to purchase fast food and disguise it as my own cooking? Delightfully.
Coming on.
It's steam. Steam from stretching my calves on the windowsill. Isometric exercise. Care to join me?
Why is there smoke coming out of your oven, Seymour?
The steamed clams we're having. That isn't smoke. It's steam. Steamed from the steamed clams we're having. That isn't smoke. It's steam. Steamed from the steamed clams we're having. That isn't smoke. It's steam. Steamed from the steamed clams we're having. Steamed clams.
I just ended up setting the width so small that it almost never overlapped the end. It's only recently that I just sat down and counted out exactly what each character's width was in pixels, and what I thought should be happening, and then having the computer output its workings and just checking everything letter by letter to make sure it was the same. The issue was something to do with, I don't know, I think it was counting the first character twice, and also for some of the letters I just hadn't inputted the right sizes. Okay, but that's done now, so can't get much worse, right? So, we have an array with each new line in a new element of the array. Each text box is 5 lines tall, so once we get to 5 lines, we'll just open a new text box. I think the simplest way of doing that would be just spawning a new pause controller object that has the new message in it. Essentially, I would delete the first pause object, and then on the first frame where the game was unpaused, I'd immediately spawn a second pause object. Okay, so let's just pass this through, and oh, that's a bit ugly. Ooh, and everything advances for a frame between text boxes. Now that looks ugly. What's going on now? Well, apparently, it shouldn't be doing this, but it looks like it's unpausing for a frame between text boxes. I don't want that to happen. Right, so how do I fix that? Well, okay, like, but because what does all this code do? Like, what do I do with this? Okay, so right, I have no idea what to do with this, so I might as well just guess. I mean, by this point, it's been a couple of weeks since I started working on this thing, so I'm already ready for it to be over. Okay, so let's just treat this whole thing as some kind of black box. It takes inputs, gives outputs, but I can't see inside or edit it. Okay, so after I remodulate it, I can just send a message forward in time about whether there's more message to display, and only reactivate everything at the end if there is. Oh, an error? What's happening now? Can you guess what the error is? Genuinely, have a guess. You'll never get it. Basically, all of this information creating the pause surface is taken from the camera, but the camera is deactivated, so it doesn't exist. There's nothing to read from. So basically, I'm going to have to feed forward everything from this create function into when I create the text box. And in the create function, where I set everything, I'll have to check whether the variables all exist already, so I don't try and overwrite them if they do. By the way, I had to do that with all of the controls too, because all of the controls are stored in the player. So now this is very messy, but it works. Finally, I'm done. I'm almost done. Almost done. The only thing that I have to do now is invent a programming language. Yeah. You see, if I want to have multiple people speaking, it might be nice to, you know, have branches in the text and decisions made by the user, and oh, I'll have to be able to set variables to store what decisions the player made as well, right? And oh yeah, the NPC might want to walk around after they speak to you. Okay, so each of those is actually quite complex. But sure, I can make it so if the text box encounters an element that says -EOB-, which stands for end of box, it looks for every consequent element that starts with this handlebar thing, which I chose because it doesn't appear in the font, so I'd never want to use it anyway. Then I can change a bunch of stuff about the text boxes. For example, I can change the color, which uses RGB, but instead of 0 to 255, it uses 0 to 9. And then with my blending shader from earlier, I can make this grayscale texture into any color I want. Then I can have decision instructions, which I had to make actually show up on screen. And then branch instructions, that's the official shortening of the word branch, by the way, sorry I don't make the rules. And these can make the text pick which direction to go next. And then of course the variable instruction, which was probably the easiest. It just sends every option the player chose into a global variable so it doesn't get deactivated when pausing. And finally, the move instruction, which, well, I could probably use that every now and then. Okay, did you get all that? Because after all that, it works. It works perfectly. Any text box can be any color, it inserts line breaks without me having to do it manually, and it might be a bit annoying to do commands right now because it's basically just an array, so I have to get the number of brackets and commas perfectly right. But yeah, Superintendent Chalmers is one lively guy. He can even slither around if he wants to. So the plan is I can just edit the appearance of all of these NPCs in the creation code individually, and also what I want them to say, and then just leave them down. And if I want to add any more commands, I can just add them here in this switch case statement. Very simple. My problem with this is that since I'm doing all this for YouTube, I get very stressed about not being able to get work done quickly enough for a video every month, which, now I think about it, is quite an unreasonable thing to expect for myself. What I'm learning is that programming is very hard to predict. I suppose that's why everyone always underestimates how long it takes to make a game, because this shit happens all the time. Actually, I got so mad with this whole thing that when I reread this script for the first time, I had to basically delete most of it because it was just really bitter and horrible. But after I got it all done, eventually I realized that I shouldn't just leave things like that. No one wants to watch a video about just ranting about text boxes for 5 minutes, and I don't want to make it. So instead, or at least as well, I made some enemies. Those are fun. Okay, well, I don't know how many enemies is a good amount, so I just guessed that as long as I can make around 3 or 4 per area, including variations, that'll be enough. Now, what makes a good enemy? Well, it would be one that forces the player to make use of their moveset, which you'll recall I made in the last video, almost as if I was specifically preparing for this very moment. The issue is that I used to have a completed map, but in the last video I completely scrapped it, so now I have basically nothing to work off of. Let's just describe how each upgrade will be found with words, and then I can materialize it in the map later. However, before I can do that, I'll need to create the general flow of the game's progression first. Since I'm making a speed game, there are other games that I can draw from that make speedrunners really have to think about what route they take. I think the gold standard for this would be Hollow Knight. It's very fun to speedrun because of how much you can do out of order. But the thing is, you can skip things, and doing skips is fun too, but that's not the only aspect. Because when you learn the map and start being able to plot out routes in your head, that's a great way of showing off your knowledge of the map. However, I also don't want my map to be too open. In my opinion, Axiom Verge 2 is not as good as the original because the map was so open that it often became really difficult to find the one place you're actually supposed to go. Also, it's not that difficult to just skip important story beats, even if it's your first play through the game. So, learning from this, my story doesn't have to be so linear. I can have individual characters pop up over and over again, but you won't have to talk to most of them in any specific order for the story to make sense. In fact, NPCs might be able to work as landmarks to aid in navigation as well. And of course, there's the standard villages that most NPCs tend to like living in for some reason, which I can also dot around the map. Oh, sorry, I'm on a tangent. Essentially, I was talking about the story as a tangent to talking about the progression. Basically, you'll have to travel through Aozayu Beach, an area that I named because I wanted to fit all 5 vowels into one word, to collect your first jump upgrade, which will let you travel either down into the Koofsen mineshaft, an area that I named because it has a lowercase u and v in it, and it's very hard to work out which way around they are in the font that I made, or up into Quoma City, an area that I named because it has the letter Q in it. Then, you can branch out for the first half of the game. Before halfway through, you have to pick up the torch before you can progress any further, because it can illuminate dark rooms for you, which you will need so you can access the second half of the game. I chose the torch to do that specifically because I'm planning on having dark rooms play a little ping at the location of anything on the screen that makes a sound. So it's not hard for a new player to kind of guess their way around. I'm hoping to make a few bosses happen in dark rooms, and make them balanced so that you can complete them without knowing the pattern. And of course, after that, you'll be able to access the Ruya underground volcano, which I named because it has a silent H in it, and defeat the final boss. Well, the final not secret boss, anyway. Except that was also a tangent from how I can design the enemies. Essentially, I'll never know what upgrades the player has at any point, but I can design enemies in each area to accentuate the player's use of certain abilities that they should have at that point. Actually, if I pick an upgrade that they're supposed to get in that area as one of the upgrades that I'm designing the enemies for, then when they actually get that ability, it'll make them feel even more powerful, hopefully. So, bearing that in mind, here's what enemies I've made so far. For Aozayu, I made this crab that walks back and forth, a thwomp thing that jumps whenever you jump, and a coconut with a shield, that stops your sword but not missiles. It can roll to make its shield face you, jump up ledges, and only very rarely fall through the floor into the void. For Kvsen, I made 3 different sizes of drill that edit the tiled sets of the map, for which I looked up how to actually do that. I also made a mole that buries through the ground, and a snail that climbs across all the surfaces. Next for Quoma, a few cannons and turrets, and some birds, including this thing which I've just called Wasp. It was actually something I programmed before I started this devlog series, one of the first things I made for this whole project actually. I was very happy with how Wasp-like its movements look, but maybe it moves too quickly, or maybe I could just put it in a later area. Then, for Elkathun, a water area that I named because it has 2 U's in a row and a voiced th. I made a bunch of fish, a clownfish that swims back and forth, a mine that hits you for 3 damage, although I might increase that to 5 since you'll likely be an Elkathun with more than 5 HP anyway. And finally, a pufferfish, whose animation I'm very proud of. Other than that, I made this guy who stomps around and whose movements I quite like, a spider that does this, and a vine worm, which you've seen these guys already. They have a few glitches in them that I said I'd fix this month. Yeah, maybe next month. As well as that, I made enemy spawners that can be used to spawn waves of enemies after the previous wave has been taken care of, as well as gates that can destroy and create walls when they're required to. The last enemy is this worm boss that you're supposed to encounter in Kvsen. It has 3 moves it can do: spawn enemies, dash across the screen, and slowly wipe across in a cardinal direction. It definitely needs some tweaking, but I'm hoping to get a boss ready for almost every major pickup. I hope I can make them good enough. According to Tom Happ, bosses are really hard, and honestly, I can see what he means. And finally, these aren't enemies, but I couldn't think of a better place to just mention that I made blocks that you can break with missiles, and blocks that stop you from grappling to them or wall jumping from them, which I'll try and use sparsely, because it's never fun to be told that you're just not allowed to use one of your upgrades, but they're there if I need them. While I've been making all these things, I keep thinking about that quote from Getting Over It. As I was building this mountain, I'd have an idea for a new obstacle, and eventually it would turn out to be unreasonably hard, but I couldn't bring myself to make it easier. It already felt like my inability to get past a new obstacle was my fault as a player, rather than as a designer. Well, these enemies are the first real thing that I've built so far that could be thought of as actual challenges that the player has to overcome, and just playing with them in a blank room, I can already see what Bennett Foddy meant by this. There's so many enemies that go too quickly, or too unpredictably, or that they're just too small to see, and so on. And I'm gonna have to fix all that stuff, because I can't have this game be as annoying as Getting Over It. I'll come back to that though, because I think I have a solution to this problem, which I'll mention at the end. So, what else did I do? Well, I did most of the stuff on this list. I was going to try and round the room corners, but after that stuff with the text boxes, I just really didn't want to bother yet. By the way, the real way you're supposed to have a pixel-perfect game is by rendering everything at a low resolution, and then scaling it up. I don't know why I didn't just do that at the start, but I guess I'm stuck like this now. Also, I added a timer and a method of saving. Currently all I can save is what choices the player made while talking to NPCs, which is basically all I need to know that I could save anything if I wanted to. Next, I have to talk about an issue that I didn't remember I had to try and deal with before I started this project. I'll try and capture some footage of laggy gameplay, and you can see that the player slows down with the frame rate. You see, I assumed that this step function would be called at regular intervals, but actually it's just called every frame, which means if a frame is slow, the physics is slow too. That means that the player will slow down as a result. The issue is that I've already made all the physics, so I think I need to go back through and multiply by delta time divided by 16,850, delta time being the number of milliseconds between this frame and the previous frame, which will hopefully speed everything up or slow it down to compensate for lag. Oh, and I'll have to do that for the enemies too. That's a lot to change. I won't make this mistake again. But at this stage, I don't think this is even possible to fix, so you might have to put up with some slow gameplay. So, here's the final to-do list for this month, with everything crossed out. I'm proud that I did most of it, despite the shaky start. As I work, I feel like I can't put off the fact that I'm actually sort of getting close to being able to, build some of the actual game. And that means I think I'll be able to recruit some of my friends to playtest the game. Well, if I can get them to. By the way, if they're listening, this is the first time they're hearing that I'm about to ask them to play my game. Which means the next episode you might be hearing a few new voices. Hopefully. They might say no. This feels like quite a big milestone, actually. I wonder when I'll actually be able to release this. It'll be my first real game. I wonder if anyone will actually play it. I wonder if anyone will pay me to play it. I wonder how hard it might be to get onto the itch.io YouTube channel. That could be something to research. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you in, well, probably more than a month.